I'll never forget the sound of his voice on the other end of the line. It wasn't even her voice that answered, but his, deep, calm, like he had every right to be there. It was the exact moment my world cracked in two, and I couldn't hold back. "Donnie," I said, the words spilling out, sharp with rage. "Listen carefully. If her son dies before I talk to her, I will find you and kill you with my bare hands." Silence. I could feel the shock hit him through the line, the way his breathing shifted. There was a quiet rustling, and then she came on, her voice tentative, caught. "Jake." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. I wanted to say everything right there, all the anger, the betrayal, but instead, I bit out, "When you're done having fun with your boyfriend, please come to the hospital emergency room." I hung up, the phone dropping from my hand, my heart thundering as I tried to understand what I'd just done, what I'd just heard. If I hadn't made that call in a fit of rage, I'd still be sitting there like an idiot, none the wiser. But now, I knew. I sat in the hospital waiting room, my foot tapping anxiously on the linoleum floor. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and a sterile smell hung heavy in the air. It should have been quiet, but my mind was screaming. I stared at my phone, half expecting her to call back, to try and explain, to feed me some story. But nothing. Minutes passed like hours, and every second only fueled the fire inside me. The image of her with him, laughing, sharing some private moment, gnawed at me, clawing at my chest. How long had I been a fool? How many times had she snuck off, leaving me and our son at home, thinking I wouldn't notice? Finally, the hospital door swung open, and in she walked, Emily, my wife, or whatever she was now. She looked stunned to see me sitting there, her eyes widening like a deer caught in headlights. She took a cautious step forward, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words, but I saw the guilt flash across her face. That quick, raw flash of realization that she was caught, that I knew everything. "Jake," she started, her voice wavering, "what's going on? You sounded so angry. Is something wrong?" I almost laughed at the way she said it, the way she tried to act as if she didn't know, like she hadn't just been with him. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of the betrayal settle even deeper. "What's going on?" I repeated, unable to keep the venom out of my voice. "You tell me, Emily. What's going on?" She looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I spat, the words sharp and cold. "I know where you were. I know who you were with. Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Her face paled, but she quickly composed herself, crossing her arms defensively. "Jake, it's not what you think," she muttered, her voice small, rehearsed. "You don't understand. It's complicated." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I snapped back. "I understand that my wife, the woman I've loved for 10 years, has been sneaking around with some guy named Donnie behind my back. What I don't understand, Emily, is why." She flinched, her eyes darting to the floor. I could tell she was scrambling, trying to find an excuse, a way to twist this, but nothing she said would undo the damage. "Jake, please," she started, her voice softer, pleading, but I didn't let her finish. "No, you don't get to, Jake, please, me right now," I interrupted, the rage bubbling up again. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us? To our family? You were with him while your son was in the hospital. What kind of mother does that?" She went pale, her mouth opening as if she was about to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stood there, silent, as I waited, hoping she'd say something, anything that would make this feel less horrible. But there was nothing she could say, and we both knew it. Emily's silence lasted only a few painful seconds. Then, as if snapping out of some daze, she lifted her head, her expression hardening. I watched her mask slide into place, the guilt fading as she found her footing, a part of her that could stand and lie to my face. "Jake, You don't understand, she said, her voice suddenly calm, almost cold. It's not that simple. Not that simple? I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet hospital hallway. Then explain it to me, Emily. Help me understand what's so complicated about cheating on your husband. She rolled her eyes, folding her arms over her chest, her stance defensive. I don't expect you to understand, she said, shrugging as if it were nothing. You've never really paid attention to me, Jake. You're always busy, always distracted with work, with everything else. Don't you dare make this about me, I shot back, feeling the anger churn hotter. I've always been there for you. I've been here for our family. But you threw it all away. For what? A thrill? A few stolen moments with some guy? Her mouth twisted into a smirk, one that chilled me to the bone. Maybe I was tired of being ignored, she said coolly. You think you're perfect? You think this marriage was so flawless? Maybe if you had paid attention once in a while, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The nerve, the audacity, to stand there, in front of me, and blame me for her affair. It felt like a punch to the gut, every word dripping with disdain, twisting the knife she'd already lodged in my back. Are you serious right now? I said, my voice shaking. You're really trying to paint yourself as the victim here? She scoffed, brushing past me to sit down on one of the waiting room chairs. You always loved being the hero, didn't you? Well, maybe this time, you're not. I was stunned, at a loss for words. The Emily I thought I knew, the sweet, caring woman I'd married, was nowhere in sight. This stranger in front of me was bitter, unfeeling, and cruel. It hit me then that she'd been hiding this part of herself all along, and maybe I'd been blind, too willing to see only the good. I tried to calm myself, to swallow the anger enough to ask one question, just one. How long? I said, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up, meeting my eyes with a challenging glare. Does it matter? Yes, it matters, I said, feeling the desperation creep into my voice. It matters because I want to know just how long I've been lied to. She sighed, as if my question bored her, as if the whole thing was some minor inconvenience. A few months, she said, shrugging like it was no big deal. Maybe a little longer. A few months, I repeated, letting the words sink in, feeling the weight of them. While I'd been working late to provide for us, taking care of our son, being the husband I thought she wanted, she'd been sneaking around with this man. Unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head. And you really think you can justify this? You really think blaming me makes it all right? She looked away, tapping her fingers on her arm impatiently. Look, Jake. People make mistakes. And maybe I'm not proud of it, but I don't regret it either. At least I felt something. I was happy. That was it. The final blow. Her words cut deeper than anything she'd said before. There was no remorse, no guilt, just cold honesty. I stared at her, trying to process it all, to make sense of how the woman I loved could say something so heartless, so completely devoid of regret. The person in front of me wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. She was someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning of the unraveling. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as I pushed open the door to our son's hospital room. The soft beeping of monitors was a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Ethan lay there, his small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed, his face pale but peaceful. Seeing him like that, so vulnerable, made my heart ache. Emily followed me in, her earlier defiance replaced by a forced calm. She approached Ethan's bedside, reaching out to gently stroke his hair. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of our earlier confrontation hanging heavily between us. "How is he?" she asked softly, not looking at me. "The doctors say he'll be fine," I replied, my voice flat. just needs rest." She nodded, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "I'm glad." I watched her, searching for any sign of the woman I once knew. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who had betrayed not just me, but our family. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm, for Ethan's sake. "We need to talk," I said quietly, not wanting to disturb our son. She glanced at me, her expression guarded. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." She sighed, finally turning to face me. "Jake, I know you're angry. But can't we just focus on Ethan right now?" "Focusing on Ethan doesn't change what you did," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "We can't ignore this, Emily. We have to deal with it." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth would be a good start," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Fine. I messed up. I made a mistake. But it doesn't change the fact that I love our son and I want to be here for him." "Being here for him means being honest," I shot back. "It means taking responsibility for your actions." She opened her eyes, meeting my gaze with a cold stare. "And what about you, Jake? Are you so perfect? Have you never made a mistake?" "This isn't about me," I said, my patience wearing thin. "This is about you betraying our family." She shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. "You always did love playing the martyr." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "I'm not playing anything, Emily. I'm trying to understand how we got here." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Maybe we were never as perfect as you thought," she said finally. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Ethan stirred, a soft moan escaping his lips. We both turned our attention to him, the tension between us momentarily forgotten. "Daddy?" Ethan's voice was weak, but it was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I leaned over, taking his small hand in mine. "I'm here, buddy. How are you feeling?" He blinked up at me, a faint smile on his lips. "Tired." "That's okay," I said softly. "You just rest. Mommy and I are right here." Emily reached out, placing her hand on Ethan's forehead. "We love you so much, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. For a brief moment, we were united in our love for our son. But the reality of our fractured relationship loomed over us, a shadow that couldn't be ignored. As Ethan drifted back to sleep, I stood up, motioning for Emily to follow me out of the room. Once we were in the hallway, I turned to her, my expression serious. "This isn't over," I said quietly. "We will talk about this. But right now, our focus is on Ethan. Agreed?" She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Agreed." I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside me. The road ahead was uncertain, and the wounds were still fresh. But for Ethan's sake, I had to find a way to navigate this storm. As we re-entered the room, I couldn't help but wonder if our family would ever truly heal from this betrayal. The hours dragged by in the hospital room. Ethan drifted in and out of sleep, and Emily sat across from me, staring at her phone or looking off into the distance, carefully avoiding eye contact. It was surreal, being in the same room yet feeling miles apart. I kept replaying her words, the coldness in her eyes, over and over in my mind. Every time I looked at her, the anger surged all over again. Ethan finally fell into a deeper sleep, and a nurse told us that he'd be resting for hours. It was as if the universe had handed me this quiet moment, giving us no excuse to dodge what needed to be said. "Emily," I started, voice low, "we can't keep tiptoeing around this." She sighed, finally meeting my gaze, her face unreadable. "Fine, Jake. Say what you want to say." "What do I want to say?" I echoed, disbelief heavy in my tone. Do you even understand what you've done? You tore our family apart, Emily. And for what? For some thrill? Her expression hardened, that cold mask snapping back into place. You act like you're the only one who's hurt, Jake. Like I'm the only one who's done something wrong. Have you ever thought about the fact that you barely see us anymore? Always at work, always too busy to notice me or anything that I needed. I blinked, trying to wrap my head around her words. That's your excuse? I work so our family can have a good life. Everything I do is for you and Ethan. She rolled her eyes, and that bitter little smirk returned. Oh, you and your sacrifices, always the martyr. You just don't get it, do you? Maybe if you paid as much attention to me as you do to your job, things would have been different. It was like talking to a stranger. The person I'd trusted more than anyone in the world was standing here, throwing everything back in my face. Emily, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but what you did, there's no excuse for that. Fine. I messed up. But maybe you had a hand in pushing me there, Jake. You're so focused on being the good guy, the reliable one, that you didn't even notice how lonely I was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, fighting to hold our family together, and she was blaming me for her choices, for the lies and betrayal. I felt something inside me snap. Lonely? I nearly shouted, struggling to keep my voice down so we wouldn't wake Ethan. Do you think I didn't feel that too? Do you think it's easy for me to be away from you and Ethan, to work late nights and early mornings? I thought we were building something together, Emily. I thought we had each other's backs. But apparently, I was wrong. She looked away, a glint of something like guilt crossing her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. People make mistakes, Jake. I'm only human. Only human? I shook my head, feeling the hurt twist inside me like a knife. You didn't just make a mistake, Emily. You made a choice. Repeatedly. To lie, to sneak around, to put some guy ahead of your family. You knew what you were doing every step of the way. She looked down, silent for a moment, the weight of my words seeming to sink in. But when she looked back up, the hardness was still there, that cold, defensive glare. So, what do you want from me, Jake? Forgiveness? Some big apology? It's not going to change anything. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. I don't know what I want from you anymore. I don't even know if I know you, Emily. I just need to know one thing: do you still want this marriage? The question hung between us, heavy and raw. She looked down, biting her lip, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Maybe I don't know what I want, she said softly. Maybe we both need to figure that out. The words stung, but part of me knew they were true. Our marriage wasn't what I thought it was, and neither was Emily. This woman standing in front of me was a stranger I had once trusted with everything, and now, I didn't know if there was anything left to save. We left the hospital in silence. Emily went ahead to get the car while I stayed back, watching Ethan sleep for a few moments longer. His tiny face, peaceful and oblivious, was a painful reminder of what was at stake here. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus on him, to let his calm presence ground me before I faced whatever lay ahead. The car ride was tense and quiet. Neither of us spoke as the city lights blurred past, painting streaks of color across the darkened windows. I could feel Emily glancing over at me occasionally, but I kept my eyes forward, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The truth was, I had no idea what to say. After everything she'd thrown at me, every cold, biting word, I wasn't sure if there was even a point. Halfway home, I finally broke the silence. So, what happens now? I asked, keeping my voice steady, trying to mask the anger simmering beneath the surface. She sighed, crossing her arms and looking out the window. I don't know, Jake. I don't have all the answers. Well, it's your mess. So, maybe you could start by explaining how you plan on fixing it. She turned to face me, her face hardening again, that defensive wall going back up. It's not that simple. Nothing ever is with you, is it? I muttered, gripping the wheel harder. Always an excuse, always someone else to blame. You say you don't have answers, but all I hear are the same tired excuses. She rolled her eyes, brushing a strand of hair back with a dismissive flick. You're not exactly perfect yourself, Jake. You're acting like this was all some huge betrayal just to hurt you. Maybe if you actually listened. Oh, I listened, Emily. I listened to you every time you said you were working late or going out with friends. And you know what? I trusted you. The words burned as they left my mouth, each syllable laced with the bitterness I'd been holding in for months. You knew exactly what you were doing. And don't tell me otherwise. She went silent again, retreating into herself, and I realized that was all she'd ever do now, retreat, hide, dodge the blame. My chest felt tight, as though the weight of her betrayal was slowly crushing me. I wanted so badly to reach across and shake her, to demand some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of what she'd done to us. But I knew better by now. She wasn't going to give me what I needed. Not here, maybe not ever. I pulled into the driveway, the engine purring softly as I shut it off. We sat there in the stillness, the quiet pressing down on us, heavy and unrelenting. Look, Jake, she said finally, her voice softened, almost pleading, I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. It just happened. I echoed, disbelief heavy in my tone. Emily, you don't just happen to betray the person you promised to love. You chose this, step by step. She looked away, but I caught a flash of something in her expression, guilt, maybe, or regret, though it was fleeting. I know I hurt you. I know I hurt our family. But what do you want from me now? Do you want to punish me forever? I don't know, I admitted, the words almost strangled. I don't know what I want, Emily. I just know that this, us, it's not the same anymore. I don't even know if there's anything left to save. She looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. So, what are you saying, Jake? You want to end this? I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. Did I want to end it? A part of me screamed yes, to cut my losses and walk away. But there was another part, quieter but just as powerful, that remembered all the good moments, all the years we'd spent together, all the dreams we'd shared. I don't know, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I just don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. We sat in silence, the weight of my words hanging between us. It was a moment of harsh, brutal honesty, a moment that shattered any illusions we had left. And as I looked at her, at the woman I once thought I knew, I realized that this wasn't a decision I could make lightly. Days passed, each one feeling longer and emptier than the last. We moved through the house like strangers, speaking only when necessary and keeping our distance. The silence between us was deafening, stretching across every room and every shared moment. It was strange, living with someone I once knew so well yet feeling like I was sharing a home with a ghost. Emily acted as if nothing had changed, as if we were two people coexisting out of habit. She'd spend her time on her phone or watching TV, ignoring the tension that crackled in the air between us. Occasionally, she'd give me these sideways glances, as if she were waiting for me to say something, to start a conversation that I couldn't bear to have. But I was tired of being the one to try. I was tired of feeling like I was the only one who cared about what we'd built. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile on her lips as she read something on the screen. A bitter thought crossed my mind, wondering if she was talking to him again, keeping secrets from me, even now. Emily, I said, keeping my voice steady, we need to talk. She looked up, her expression unreadable, and set her phone down with a sigh. Fine, Jake. Let's talk. What's left to say? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I don't think you understand how serious this is. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. You broke my trust, and I can't keep living in this lie. She looked away, crossing her arms defensively. And what do you want me to do about it, Jake? Do you want me to beg for forgiveness? Do you want some grand gesture to make it all better? Her indifference was like a slap in the face. I'd spent countless nights grappling with my emotions, trying to understand how we'd gotten here, while she seemed almost indifferent, like the gravity of what she'd done meant nothing to her. I just want you to show that you care, I said, feeling the frustration build. Show me that our marriage matters to you, that I matter to you. She laughed, a hollow sound that made my stomach turn. Jake, maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're holding on to something that isn't there anymore. Maybe we're not who we thought we were. Her words hung in the air, heavy with a painful truth I hadn't wanted to face. For so long, I'd tried to convince myself that we could fix this, that somehow, we could come back from this betrayal. But as I looked at her, at the coldness in her eyes, I realized that maybe she was right. Maybe we were clinging to a memory, to a version of ourselves that no longer existed. So, that's it, then? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're just done? She shrugged, her expression impassive. Maybe I am. Maybe you are too. Maybe we're both too stubborn to admit it. The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating. I had loved her deeply, had given everything to build a life with her, but now, all I felt was a hollow ache, an emptiness that seemed to echo through every corner of our life together. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Then maybe it's time we face the truth, Emily. Maybe it's time we stop pretending. She nodded, not saying a word, and I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, as if she'd been waiting for me to take this step, to finally let go. I turned, walking down the hallway to our room, each step feeling like a small release, a weight lifting from my shoulders. As I closed the door behind me, I realized that this was the beginning of the end. The end of us, of the life we'd once shared. And as painful as it was, there was a strange sense of clarity in it, a quiet acceptance of what was and what would never be again. The next morning was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that comes after a storm. I could feel it as soon as I woke up, an eerie stillness that settled over everything. I lay in bed for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. This was it. I knew it with a kind of resigned certainty. Today was the day I would let go, no matter how much it hurt. I walked into the kitchen to find Emily already up, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, something like sadness flashed across her face, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Morning, she said, her voice almost normal. As if nothing had changed. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Emily, I think it's time for us to go our separate ways. She looked down, setting her coffee mug on the counter with a soft clink. I saw her take a deep breath, and for a split second, I thought she might say something to stop me, to fight for us. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, her face unreadable. I think you're right, Jake, she said softly. Maybe it's for the best. There was no anger left, no accusations or bitterness, just a quiet, aching acceptance. I could feel the finality of it, and as much as it hurt, there was also a strange relief. We both knew this was the end. We'd fought, we'd tried to make it work, but in the end, some things were just broken beyond repair. I turned away, walking down the hall to pack a few things, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I paused at Ethan's room, watching him sleep peacefully, blissfully unaware of the turmoil unfolding around him. I would be here for him, no matter what, I promised myself. He would never know the pain I'd felt, the betrayal that had torn his parents apart. After I packed, I walked back to the kitchen, where Emily was still standing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked at me, her eyes hollow and distant, as though a part of her had already accepted this reality long before I did. "Take care of yourself, Emily," I said, the words heavy with finality. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You too, Jake." And that was it. I walked to the door, every step feeling like 1,000, each one heavier than the last. Just as I reached for the handle, her voice stopped me. "Jake," she started, and I turned, feeling the hope flare one last time, a desperate spark clinging to what little was left. But her face was expressionless, her eyes void of any emotion. I hope you can find someone who makes you happy." The words hit me harder than any argument, any accusation. In that moment, I realized that she had already moved on. Long before I'd found out, long before I'd even suspected. The life we'd shared, the love I thought we had, it was already a memory to her, something distant and forgotten. I forced myself to nod, to smile, to pretend like I was strong enough to walk away without breaking. And then I left, closing the door behind me, feeling the finality of it settle in my bones. I walked out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and the weight of 10 years of memories, good and bad, swirling through my mind. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold morning air, feeling the ache of loss settle deep in my chest. But I kept walking. Because sometimes, the only way to survive heartbreak is to keep moving forward, one painful step at a time. As I reached the end of the driveway, a strange, bittersweet feeling washed over me. I felt the pain, the emptiness, but I also felt something else, hope. Hope for a future where I could rebuild, where I could heal and maybe even find love again, love that wouldn't betray me, love that wouldn't fade. And as I looked back at that house, one last time, I whispered a silent goodbye, not to Emily, but to the man I used to be. Then I turned and walked away, leaving the broken pieces of my past behind me, ready to face whatever came next.